How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. This is the weekend video where I cover all the stories that kind of slipped by me through the week, but a lot of news came out in the middle of the week, so there's a ton of new stuff to talk about. I've got three topics to cover today. The first one is that Layden, the two CEOs ago of PlayStation, just did an interview on GamesIndustry.biz where he gave his thoughts on how to fix the growing problems of the PlayStation business model. Second on the list, we're talking about how Sony is getting rid of their rewards program that you probably didn't know about in the first place. And third, we're going to talk about why Sony is skipping Gamescom and whether or not that's a good idea. Before I jump into it, I've made my way through all of the friend requests I've gotten on the PlayStation Network. It's up to 800 now, so I had to do them in batches of 100. At first, it was letting me do them really quickly, 100, 100, 100, but then it locked me out because I was accepting too many people, so I had to give it a day, come back, add 100 more people, but I am finally caught up. So yeah, if you added me on there, you probably saw me playing a lot of Gran Turismo 7. I'm making my way through the gold challenges for the license tests. I'm on the S ones, the last batch of tests, and I'm on S4. S3 took me about 2 weeks to get through, but last night I beat the record by 2 seconds, so that felt really good. Let's jump into this first news story though. It's coming from Layden. Out of all the PlayStation CEOs that were acting in my lifetime, I guess, I really liked Layden. He brought out some of the best games during the PS4 generation, and arguably a lot of the games that came out in the beginning of the PS5 generation that were very good were shepherded by him. He's the one who helped greenlight those back in the day. So as far as eras of PlayStation, I've always kind of respected what this guy did and what he brought to the table for the PlayStation brand. I like him a lot more than Jim Ryan, that's for sure. So he did an interview with GamesIndustry.biz and he talked about how he would fix the growing problems of PlayStation's business model. It was also about the gaming industry as a whole, but the first thing he talked about was making games shorter. He was yeah, 68% of people who play long games that take 40 or 50 hours to complete, if you check their trophies, they don't complete those games. So maybe we should make games that are 20 to 30 hours that you can get through the story, or if you want to be a completionist, that's when you can start racking up the extra hours that it would take. And if you look at one of Sony's first party games, it's a perfect example of this. Ghost of Tsushima. If you want to get through just the story in that game and pick up a couple side things that you can find, collectibles and everything like that, as you're making your way through, that game's probably going to take you around 25 to 30 hours. It's not an extremely difficult game, but if you want to go the extra mile and get the platinum, which is not difficult by any means, but it will take you more time at around 40 to 50 hours. So I like games that are set up like that, where the core experience, you don't feel like you're getting ripped off on, it's all killer, no filler. You can get through it pretty quickly in 20 to 30 hours. But then if you want to take the extra leap and get every little last cent you spent on that game out of it, there should be more options there for you to continue on after the story's completed, or complete the map as you make your way through the game. Because the first time I played Ghost of Tsushima on my PS5, I ripped through the story. I thought it was pretty good, but once it came out on PC and I started playing it again, this time around I'm 100%ing it, and honestly it gives you a completely different game experience, because if you collect everything as you're making your way through, you end up a lot stronger. So it gives you a choice on how you want to play the game, and I think that's great. A good example of this going in the negative direction would be Xbox's new exclusive Hellblade 2. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot with this game. They announced it with the Series X. They kind of made it seem like it was oh, the first game was a AA game that was pretty much funded entirely by Ninja Theory, so we bought them and we're giving them a big AAA budget to turn Hellblade 2 into a full-on action adventure game to rival the likes of God of War and Uncharted. And it really, I don't know who to put the blame on, whether it's Ninja Theory or Microsoft, because Microsoft didn't really say that. It's how it felt from how it was announced. Then we basically ended up waiting 8 years for that game, and it was 5 hours long. But yes, it did have the best graphics pretty much of any game out, at least this year. The combat's super simple. It's just not a very meaty experience, even for people who want to play games on Game Pass with their free subscription. So when you're talking about making games shorter, I don't think it means make games 5 to 6 hours long and put all the budget that you can into that shorter experience, but don't over bloat the game. There's tons of examples of stuff like that, like Far Cry 6. I know a lot of Far Cry fans. I'm a diehard Far Cry fan. I have the platinum in 3 and 4. I liked 5. It felt a little too big, and then 6 was just way too much content for me to really even feel like I was getting a meaningful experience. The last Assassin's Creed trilogy, I feel like Origins came in at a good point where if you wanted to just beat the story, it was 30 hours or so long, but by the time Valhalla came out, even if you just wanted to get through the entire game, you were looking at 70 to 80 hours just to do the story content. And if you want to 100% that game, like a lot of people did in Origins, I mean, you're going to be playing forever. So that's kind of the bad example of a game being too big that I think he's talking about. Not necessarily something like God of War Ragnarok, where getting through the story 30 hours, completing 100% of the game, 50 to 60 hours, right? Like, you don't have to make the entire thing a 50-hour forced experience if that's not what the game demands. And a great example of that, again, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm still chipping away at that game. It's like 100 hours long, even if you're not doing anything. That definitely falls in the too long camp. So as far as making games shorter, I don't want them Hellblade short, but I do like the way PlayStation's been doing it with stuff like Spider-Man or Ghost of Tsushima. The second point he had was to stop chasing photorealism, and on like the surface I agree, but I like the middle ground that PlayStation's found with games like The Last of Us or Uncharted. They are by no means photorealistic, but they've gotten the closest that you can get to playing a movie, right? Like, they do things that couldn't be done in an Uncharted movie, like when buildings are falling over and like individual bricks are flying everywhere. Even that car chase, that famous car chase from Uncharted 4, that's something that you really couldn't film effectively in a movie. But at the end of the day, the graphics aren't photorealistic. They're stylized. They're washed in color. The characters have a little bit of a softer edge to their face. It's going for photorealism, but it knows that line to stop at where it's going to start feeling like the uncanny valley. And I think the same thing goes for The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. I think those games do perform and play better with the graphic style that they have. I mean, the whole point of The Last of Us is to be the most brutal game ever, and that's ratcheted up to 11 in The Last of Us Part 2, where the gore system's absolutely insane. It's supposed to make you feel like you're getting revenge on these people for what happens at the beginning of the story. And if it was a more stylized game like, I don't know, Dead Island 2, it would bring a more wacky tone to the experience that I don't think would have served it very well. I understand why he's saying what he's saying about chasing photorealism, because that seems to be a big factor in increasing the development time of a lot of AAA games these days. And I don't think every game needs to have the photorealistic qualities of something like The Last of Us or Uncharted, but I also think there is room for those type of games, and you just have to know going into the experience that you're making what kind of game you're making, right? Like Assassin's Creed Shadows, you could probably go for a more stylized look with that. It doesn't need to be photorealistic or anything, and a great example of that is the game that Assassin's Creed seems to just rip off at every possible opportunity, which is The Witcher 3. That game is very stylized. It's borderline cel shaded, and it looks like you're playing a painting, but it's still gory and dark when it needs to be. So yeah, I get what he's saying, but like, I don't think chasing photorealism is like a problem unless you're in, again, a situation like Hellblade 2, where chasing photorealism resulted in a game that you just walk around and barely play, and it's 5 hours long. Like, if you're at that point, probably pull back a little bit, stop chasing the photorealism. But if you're at the point of something like Uncharted 4 or The Last of Us Part 2, that's a good sweet spot, at least in my opinion. The third point he had, I was like, I don't know about this one, and then I read into it and it makes a little more sense. He said start using the machine more when developing games, so obviously that means use AI when developing games. I don't want AI developing art assets. Anything that you can pay a person to come in and give them a full-time salary to create assets like clothes for characters, their facial expressions, the graffiti on the walls. I mean, like, anything that's artistic, I want handled by an actual human being. But then he talked about how like the extra fluff in games, like the stuff that artists aren't really having their talents flexed on by making, a lot of that stuff is outsourced already to like visual effects farms in other countries. And so at that point, I would be fine with using AI instead of that, because they'd be able to keep more stuff in-house. I mean, that's a huge problem with Microsoft, how much of their stuff is contracted out. That's a huge reason why the new Forza Motorsport is as mediocre as it is. It's because they were using contractors to develop a big portion of the game. And if you're a contractor, you can only work for a certain amount of time before you have to be hired as a full-time employee. So people would get like 60 to 70% through a project on the game, and then they'd have to hire someone new to come in, catch up, and then finish the work, which is why the game development took so long. So if there's something like programming a path for an NPC to walk on, or like, you know, writing flavor dialogue or something like that, I really don't think I have a problem with using AI on something. And if that's going to speed up the development time of a more photorealistic game, I think that's worth doing. But like, if you want to have a big art project, but if you want people to really connect with your project, I think you still need that human touch, right? Like, the whole reason everyone hates Marvel movies now is because everything is a green screen. Like, there's an apartment that Sam Jackson is sitting in Captain America, I think Civil War or the Winter Soldier, and he's just sitting in a chair in an apartment, and then they're like, whoa, we made this whole apartment out of a blue screen. It's visual effects and you didn't know. And it's like, yeah, but wouldn't it have been cheaper and quicker just to build a set of an apartment for him to sit in a chair in? And like, even his gun is like just the trigger, and then there's like a bunch of those dots that they use to make visual effects. Like, when you do that, it makes everything feel stale and just like lifeless. So yeah, anything that you can use humans for effectively to keep the time that it takes to make the game down, I'm all for that. But like, a knob on a dresser, a chair, something like that. If AI can effectively make a model for that, is it really a big problem? Like, is someone building their career in the industry building a chair? I don't know. I'm not a visual effects person, but like, there's got to be some stuff that they could optimize with AI to kind of stop having to outsource so much of their game development to these like visual effects farms in other countries. Because at that point, that's just a job, right? Like, that's not you really caring about the project you're working on at Naughty Dog or something. Like, if you're in the visual effects farm, you're just trying to get your work done for the day, and you're like, I'm throwing this chair together, whatever, it looks good enough, you know? So like, something like that, I feel like AI is okay. Next up here, let's talk about this rewards program that's disappearing from the PlayStation ecosystem that you probably didn't know about. So when I was a freshman in college in 2011, I want to say, it might have been 2012, Sony announced a credit card in partnership with Capital One, and I got conned into signing up for it because you got $50 of PSN credit. I actually had my mom sign up for it and then cancel it. I got the $50, then I signed up for it, and then I canceled it and I got my $50. So I had $100 in PlayStation credit. I got like $800 in debt, and I was like, nope, credit cards are not for me. So I paid that off by doing my job, replacing the paper in the computer lab at my college, and I got rid of it. But one of the things that came along with that credit card was PlayStation rewards. So if you use the card on specific things, you would get rewards points, and then you could redeem them for things like, I don't know, PlayStation Store credit or actual games. I think I used it like twice because yeah, once I got $800 in debt in college when I had no money, that was not a good time. So I didn't really effectively use this card enough to really reap any benefits from it, but it doesn't seem like anyone else did either, because I haven't thought about it in forever. I don't have that credit card anymore, and Sony is getting rid of the program. But if you have that credit card, the points, as far as I'm aware, never really expire. So if you've been racking up points and you didn't even know you had them, make sure you go check and get any rewards that you can, because you spent money, you paid it off with interest. I mean, at least get a little bit of a reward back for it. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, the timing is super bizarre, honestly, like with everything that's going on with PlayStation Stars. I do not know what is happening there. Sony still is being completely silent. We talked about in the last video where people asked support and they said, yep, we're keeping track of your points. But now they're telling people that maybe they're not keeping track of their points. And when I opened up my PlayStation app today to answer one of you guys who asked me about Diablo 4, I got a new animation for the PlayStation Stars logo, and I was like, oh, are they advertising it's fixed? No, I click on it and I still get that phone with a gear that says it's not working right now and they're still working on it. I don't know what happened. Like, how is it that hard to have your rewards program that was functioning perfectly fine not work and then just fix it? Like, I can't conceive how this is like that big of an issue over at Sony, where we've been waiting 3 weeks, I want to say at this point, for them to even give an update on it other than it's not working right and we're working on it. And it's a totally self-inflicted wound. Like, no one was begging for PlayStation Stars as a program. They made it of their own volition. So it's like, if you're putting it out there, make sure it works, right? Like, Sony is classic at putting things out before they're ready and then being like, I don't know, we're working on it. Like, even releasing hardware, the PS Portal, they didn't know how many people were going to want it. The PS5, they were supply constrained forever. They got to think a little more ahead with this stuff, so when they go to change a minor thing in this program, it doesn't go down for 3 weeks at a time. I don't feel like that's asking too much out of them. But anyway, that brings us to the third news story of today's video, which is that Sony is skipping Gamescom. And honestly, E3 going away, I was a little misty about it. I got to go a few times, and by like the third or fourth time I went, I was like, it was really cool the first couple of times because back in the day, I would take off work and watch it with my friends, but then it just like lost its luster. But Gamescom was the one I was always excited for as a Vita fan because that's where Sony saved all of their Vita announcements for. It's basically the European version of E3. They would do a showcase and yeah, they would announce all their Vita games there. So I would always stay up super late to watch the opening night event for Gamescom where Sony would do their showcase. And I kind of was thinking maybe because the state of play was so mediocre that maybe they were saving some games to announce at Gamescom, but they confirmed they're skipping it for the nth year in a row. Nintendo is skipping it as well. I understand why, because they have these new avenues with state of play and their showcases where they can bring it in-house, but I don't know, as someone who grew up with this stuff, I do really miss being able to just sit down and have a CEO, even if he was fake, with Kevin Butler get on stage and do a whole like song and dance comedy bit where they're announcing new games for the PlayStation 3. That was a huge and very formative moment for me as a PlayStation gamer. And it's really what got me into the whole zeitgeist of being a PlayStation fan. Like having everyone together to only talk about PlayStation games and seeing people out in the crowd, it was a really cool experience. And even if you look at E3 and how that ended up for Sony, it totally changed, right? Like they went from doing it in a stadium or a theater where people could come in like actual fans and watch what was happening to shuffling people between giant tents in the parking lot of the LA Convention Center so they could see 15 seconds of Ghost of Tsushima, move to another tent, see Spider-Man, move to another tent, see The Last of Us Part 2. I understand why that went away, but yeah, I kind of miss Gamescom and I was really hoping they'd show up. So it looks like all we really have to look forward to for the rest of the year is this showcase that has yet to materialize. I'm thinking August or September so they can announce the PS5 Pro alongside a bunch of first-party games from Naughty Dog, Sucker Punch, Santa Monica Studio, and everyone else. And we also just heard that Blue Point is still working on an original game. So they are cooking stuff. They just need to announce it already. That is the point that I'm not going to go into again because I just went into it last video and went on a rant, but I want some announcements from Sony's first party. I'm sick of these third-party exclusives. I'm sick of second-party exclusives. Let's get these games announced, baby. Let's go. But yeah, that's all I've got for you today. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I hope you're having a great weekend. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.